Welcome back to my channel. My name is Lulu, and you're watching Call Me Lulu. I just read a book that I want to talk about called Margarita in the Spotlight. I actually listened to an audiobook version of this book, so it's made specifically to be an audiobook, and it has original songs in it that the author made in collaboration with the songwriter. It's actually a middle grade book, and it's about a 12-year-old girl named Margarita who plays in a family country band, and she's basically just trying to discover her identity as an emerging adolescent and also as a mixed Latina. I really loved the story. When I finished it, I wept of cuteness. I absolutely loved it. Full disclosure, my friend wrote this book, but she did not ask me to read it. She didn't even know that I read it before I let her know that I would be talking about it on this channel. So I am biased on it, but I am also completely right. If it interests you, please go check it out. It's wonderful. And it inspired me to go back and read other books from my childhood to see if I had good taste as a child. Not that I have good taste now. So I picked 3 books that I thought were most special to me when I was a kid, and I went back and I reread them. And I'm gonna let y'all see how that went. The first book that I reread for this video was Hoot by Hiaasen. It's a book about Roy Everhart, a 12-year-old boy who moves from Montana to Florida with his family, and he befriends a young runaway / environmental activist and his sister, who is Brie Larson, basically. And they're trying to protect a local habitat for owls that is being developed into a pancake house. The book is really funny. It was made into a movie with Logan Lerman, Cody Lindley, and Brie Larson in the lead roles, and I watched that movie all the time when I was younger. When I went back to read the book, it did kind of surprise me how much I remembered, but overall it was kind of a 3-star. I loved kind of how funny it was. I think Hiaasen puts a lot of comedy into it. I don't know that it all hit for me because I am in my 20s now, but I think if I were a middle school boy, it would be perfect. It also tackles systems of oppression in a really nuanced way, but in a context that middle schoolers can understand, which I think is wonderful. In this book, one of the perspectives is from a local policeman, and instead of protecting the people of the neighborhood, the policeman is essentially assigned to be a private security officer for this corrupt corporation that's developing land illegally, which really touches on something we talked about in my anthropology classes called the over-policing, under-policing paradox, where police tend to protect but not surveil those in power, but surveil but not protect those who are vulnerable. So the owls are vulnerable in that situation. They need their habitat. And instead of protecting them, which by law they should, police end up assisting the company that's developing their land. And the kids are trying to stop it. They pull all kinds of pranks in order to try and get the development company to move off of the land. And it, hilarity ensues. So I loved this book kind of for the activist stance that it took and the creativity that it had and the nuance that it had in its subject matter. I did kind of have a real problem with this book in that Mullet Fingers, who is the friend who is the environmental activist, does some things that make me concerned for him as an adult, and I couldn't get over it. The book is kind of framed that he's a kid who's known hurt, and so he really wants to protect the animals because he thinks that they're being hurt, which he's right, they are. And he wants to save them from feeling the same way that he did. However, the way that he goes about it seems to really harm the animals. Like some of the pranks that he pulls on like the development company, he like puts alligators in the porta potties at the construction site, which seems unsafe like for the alligators. He also like spray paints snakes, like cottonmouths. He picks cottonmouths up out of their environment and like spray paints them so that he could tell which snakes are his. He also tapes their mouths shut, I think, and then releases them on the construction site. Call me crazy, but I don't think that you should spray paint your snakes. But that's just me. Anyway, I had a hard time like engaging with Hoot after that. So I would say like a 3 out of 5. I think it is a classic, but I had a really hard time connecting with it because I think the kids' behavior sometimes pulled me out of it. The second book I read, but the third book that I am filming, because I think the first time I tried to film this, I didn't press record, is The Ghosts of Fossil Glen by Cynthia DeFelice. Cynthia DeFelice wrote a ton of children's books, many of which are well regarded, and she actually passed earlier this year, so it was nice to be able to go back to her book. I first read this book in the 2nd grade, and I loved everything about it. I loved that it had fossils, I loved that it was spooky, and I just loved how it made me feel. The book is about 12-year-old Allie and her friend Dub. What you need to know about Allie is that she is not like other girls, but like in a way that you can get past, and her friend Dub would have been played by a 12-year-old Dule Hill. And they befriend a ghost girl named Lucy, who is a cool ghost. And they are trying to solve the mystery of how she died and bring her killer to justice, which is a heavy topic for a middle grade book, but it handles it really well. The second book in this video that is about preventing the corporate development of local wildlife habitats. So like I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. You know, the prose in this book was more straightforward than the prose in the other books, and I think that's something that's just kind of not for me. I really like flowery descriptive writing, but I think it would make it really accessible for like kids who are reading by themselves for the first stage in their life instead of having books read to them. But overall, I thought this was like a really good story to read in the spooky season. It's the beginning of the spooky season now, so I'm glad that I read this. It did give me like one really good scare, which can be hard to do. I'll read like actual horror books that like don't scare me at all. So I think it's cool that I got a scare from this book, and I think I am gonna do a video talking about my spooky reads for this season, and I'm gonna include this book. Hello, it is a new day, and so a new outfit. I am here to talk about the third book that I read for this video. It was Esperanza Rising by Pam Muñoz Ryan. I was really nervous to reread this book. I did reread it in high school, and I felt the same way I did about it when I was in 2nd grade, but I was kind of afraid that when my like adult tastes had developed, I wouldn't like it anymore. And when I'm talking about my favorite books now, because I loved this book so much when I was little, I still list it among my favorites. So I was really afraid I wasn't gonna like it. This book follows 13-year-old Esperanza as she and her mother and her family servants have to escape from Mexico to California during the Mexican Revolution. Esperanza's family are aristocrats during the Mexican Revolution, and they end up under threat, and they have to escape with their servants. And they go to Mexico and they work in a migrant labor camp and try to heal from some really traumatic things that happened while they were still in Mexico. I really adored this book when I was a child, so I was excited to read it again. The story is actually based on Pam Muñoz Ryan's grandmother's life story. When I read it, I still loved it. 5 stars. I could talk about this book forever, literally forever. If you want me to do like a 30-minute video on this book, let me know, because I could. It's amazing. It is just like so nuanced and like so intersectional, and like talks about class and race in a way that I think that like only a story based off something true really could. You can tell that like this is like a story that Pam Muñoz Ryan grew up hearing. In it, there are, another thing I love about it is like, even though it takes place in the US, it does feel like it's not US centered. The characters retain their like culture and their Mexican nationality when they cross the border. And the politics and the economics and all of the family situations that they're talking about are seen through the context of like being Mexican. And I really appreciate that. I feel like, you know, you can tell that this book was written by someone who is like of that culture, because I think so many books by like white writers, I understand like I am very white and so it's weird for me to talk about this, but books about like Mexican culture or Central American culture by white writers that aren't a part of that culture, I think often can have like events that take place in Central America, but they're always referenced in the context of like how it affects the US. Here it's like you hear the characters talk about the Dust Bowl, which is happening across the US and is something that we learn about in like US history classes. But we learn about it from the way that it affected like people in the Great Plains region who were mostly white at the time. So instead of hearing about like families that get uprooted and have to move to California, you hear from Esperanza's perspective how like families are moving to California and how like people from Oklahoma are taking jobs and are receiving better treatment than like workers from Mexico. And it's really, really interesting to see. I also think that like the way that like race and like color are talked about specifically in this story are also very nuanced and like put within a Central American context. Esperanza is a Mexican of Spanish descent. So her skin is lighter, her like descent is different than Miguel, who is the son of Esperanza's servants when they're in Mexico. That family is of indigenous descent and they are domestic workers for Esperanza's family until they get to the US and they're all doing the same job. And we hear from Esperanza's perspective over and over again in her friendship with Miguel, which like they are friends, she still kind of elevates herself above him. She says like, we're on a different side of a river. That like Miguel can never cross. I'll always be different from him and I'll always retain that. And throughout it's like giving me goosebumps now. Throughout the story, Esperanza learns to reevaluate her relationship with like class and with color and with race in a way that's like really wonderful. Anyway, I like how like this book like talks about colorism and like different prejudices, but it's never about white people. Like Esperanza's, or I guess like it's never about white non-Latinos. Like Esperanza is like people from Oklahoma, white people from California, almost never touched on. And I think it's like really interesting. Another thing that this book talks about is like the agricultural labor movement. This book takes place during the Dust Bowl, so toward the beginning of the agricultural labor movement. And Esperanza and her family have to navigate whether or not they want to strike, whether they want to sacrifice income in order to earn like better working conditions, and just how difficult it was for workers in that time to make a decision to strike or to make a decision to like endure the conditions that they were already working in. Also, an unfun fact, as my critique group member Sean would call it, Esperanza Rising touches on the agricultural labor movement and the poor working conditions for like migrant laborers, and so does Margarita in the Spotlight, and these books take place 90 years apart, but they're still addressing poor working conditions and actual child labor, low wages that like occurred in the 1920s and 30s and are still occurring today. Yeah, which I think just like says a lot about the culture that we live in, and I feel like is a motivator to me to like learn more about things and to try to affect change. The prose in this book is also wonderful. Like, Pam Muñoz Ryan is on her Oscar bullshit. It's amazing. It is so literary and like so emotive and still so accessible. Esperanza is from a ranch originally, and she moves into like an agricultural area. So throughout her life, she's had so much connection with the land that she's living in, and the way that she describes it is from the point of view of someone who is like so knowledgeable and so connected to the earth. Like, each chapter name is a different fruit. In Spanish, it's usually like the fruit or like produce item that they're harvesting at the time. And I just found that really wonderful. And yeah, I would read this again in a heartbeat. I would talk forever about it, but I want this video to be kind of short. That was my experience reading 3 books from my childhood. I think I did learn a lot through this. I think especially just about the diversity of books I used to read when I was little. I think now I read pretty much just like literary fiction that has like kind of like an ethereal, like bouncy tint to it. And I kind of like don't think about like reading horror or like reading comical books or like more satirical books like Hoot. But I really enjoyed like reading those 3 books now, and I enjoyed them a lot when I was little. And I think I should probably branch out more into like different genres. I think it also put in context for me, like, as someone who hasn't been a child in a while and who doesn't have children, like, why the discourse over children's books is like so intense, and there's just like so much ire and like vitriol in it. Because like all of these books were intensely political, and like maybe children's literature is just inherently like very political, which makes me want to read more children's books even more. But I wonder what you guys think of all of these books that I read. Did you guys read any of these when you were younger? Did you connect with them in the same way that I did, or a different way? I hope we can start some discourse down in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about what your favorite books were when you were a child, and if you think they still hold up now. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to do the things like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, whatever you want to do, please do it. Don't be shy, but also don't feel like you have to support if you don't feel like that's for you. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, wonderful week. Stay hydrated, listen to some bluegrass. I'll see you soon.